The man who tried to steal a piece of my land did it so slowly that for 3 years I helped him do it. That is the part one have never told anybody until now. He didn't take it all at once. If he had taken it all at once, I'd have seen it. Anybody would have seen it. He took it an inch at a time, a fence post here, a flower bed there, so patiently, so reasonably, that by the time I understood what was happening I had already, without knowing it, started treating his version of the line as the truth. Stay with me, because I want to tell you how a rich man with a lawyer nearly took a strip of my family's land by simply acting, over and over, calmly, as though it was already his, and how it all came apart because of something my father planted 40 years ago that this clever man never thought to look at. My name is Earl Vance, and I am nobody special, and I need you to understand that up front because it's the whole reason he thought he could do it. I live on a few acres at the edge of town that my father bought when I was a boy and that I inherited when he passed. It is not fancy land. There's the house, a workshop, a garden, a stand of trees along one side that my dad planted the year we moved in. I've lived there most of my life. I raised my kids there. I know that land the way you know your own body, and I want to tell you about the trees, because they matter more than anything else in this story, and neither of us knew it yet. The year we moved in, my father planted a row of trees along what he understood to be the property line. A line of them, evenly spaced, a windbreak and a marker both, because my dad was a practical man, and a tree that marks your line also blocks the wind and gives you shade and outlives you, which is about as good a use of a Saturday as a working man ever found. I was 9 and I helped him. I remember it because it was the first real work he ever trusted me with, and I remember him showing me how to space them, using a length of rope knotted at even intervals so the row would be straight and true, and I remember him saying a thing I didn't understand then and understand completely now. He said, "Earl, you put a tree on your line, and you never have to argue about your line again. A fence rots. A stake gets pulled. Paper gets lost. But a man's got to be a real special kind of liar to argue with a tree that's been standing for 50 years. He was laughing when he said it. He had no idea he was describing the exact thing that would save this land 40 years later. He was just a father teaching his boy to use a knotted rope, planting the truth into the ground where it would grow too big to move. Those trees grew up alongside me. They are old now, big, gnarled, the kind of trees that have been in the same spot so long that nobody alive questions them. And for 40 years, that row of trees was simply, obviously, where my land ended and the next parcel began. Nobody ever thought about it. There was nothing to think about. The trees were the line. Everyone knew it. For most of those years, the parcel next door belonged to an old couple, the Haddads, quiet people, good neighbors, and there was never one cross word about anything in all that time. And then the Haddads got old and moved to be near their daughter, and they sold the parcel, and that is when Bram Corliss moved in next door, and everything changed so slowly that I couldn't feel it changing. Corliss had money. Real money, the kind that arrives in a place like ours and immediately makes everything around it look small and shabby by comparison, which I think is a thing that money enjoys doing. He tore down the Haddads' modest place and built something large and modern and expensive, and he landscaped it to within an inch of its life, and he was, on the surface, perfectly pleasant. He'd wave. He'd make small talk about the weather over the trees. And I want to be fair because for the first year I liked him fine. I had no reason not to. He was just the rich fellow next door with the nice truck and the firm handshake. The first thing was the flower bed. About a year in, Corliss put in a long flower bed running along our shared side, and it was a foot, maybe 2 feet, onto my side of that row of trees. Just a little. And I noticed it, and I stood there looking at it, and I had that feeling you get, that small wrong note feeling, and then I talked myself out of it. Because what was I going to do? Go over there and accuse a man I barely knew of stealing 18 inches of dirt over a flower bed? He'd think I was insane. I think I was insane. It was a foot of ground I wasn't using. It was flowers. So I said nothing. And that, right there, was the first inch, and my silence was the shovel. The next spring it was a low decorative fence, a pretty little thing, and it ran along the far edge of that same flower bed, which meant the fence was now a foot or 2 onto my land, and it made the flower bed look like it had always belonged on his side, because now there was a fence saying so. And again I noticed, and again I stood there with that wrong note feeling, and again I did the arithmetic of embarrassment. Was I really going to have a property dispute with the neighbor over 2 feet and some petunias? People would think I was a small, bitter man. The rich guy would just smile and say, "Oh, Earl, surely we can be reasonable about a garden." So I let it go. Second inch. And this is the thing I most need you to understand because it's the actual mechanism, it's how this is really done, and it is being done to people right now. He never made a claim. Not once in those early years did Bram Corliss ever say, "That's my land." If he'd said that, I'd have had to answer it, and I'd have said no it isn't, and we'd have had it out right there while the truth was still fresh and the trees still obviously marked the line. He never gave me anything to answer. He just acted. He just quietly, steadily behaved as though the line were a little further onto my side than it was, and every time he did, he dared me silently to be the crazy one who made a scene, and every time I declined the dare and every time I declined, his new line got a little more real. Because that's how possession works in the mind. You see a fence, you assume it's the line. You see a garden, you assume it belongs to the house behind it. He wasn't stealing my land with a claim. He was stealing it with landscaping, one reasonable-looking improvement at a time, and he was using my own decency, my own horror of being petty, as his primary tool. By the third year I had, God help me, started to believe it a little myself. I'd look over there and the flower bed and the little fence looked so established, so intentional, so obviously his, that some part of my mind had quietly filed that ground as belonging to him. I had been, without ever agreeing to a thing, slowly relocated in my own head. That is what patience does. That is the weapon. Not force. Time. And then he made his move and I finally understood the whole thing. That third autumn, Corliss brought in a crew, and over the course of 2 days they took out the little decorative fence and the flower bed and they built a real fence. A tall one, solid, permanent, expensive, a proper fence, and they built it not where the old flower bed had been, and not where the trees were, but a good several feet onto my land, well past the trees, taking in a strip of ground the whole length of the property that had been, without any question, mine and my father's for 40 years. In 2 days. He took years of patient inching and he cashed it in all at once, and he built a wall on my land, and he did it while I was at work, and I came home to a new fence standing in my own yard. I went over there. Of course I went over there. And this is the moment the whole thing turned, and I want you to hear exactly what he said, because it is the most important thing in the story. I said, "Bram, that fence is on my property, that's well past the tree line, you know that's my land." And Bram Corliss looked at me, calm, pleasant, not angry at all, and he said, "Earl, that's always been my line. Check your deed. This has been the boundary since before you and I ever spoke. I'd hate for there to be any confusion, but I've had it surveyed and I'm confident in where things stand. If you disagree, of course, you're welcome to take it up properly. Always been my line. Check your deed. Take it up properly." Do you hear what he did? In 3 sentences, he rewrote 40 years. He didn't argue about the fence, he asserted a past. He spoke as though the line had always been where he just moved it, as though the trees meant nothing, as though my father had never planted a thing, as though the reality was the fence he built on Tuesday. And he invoked the deed and a survey and properly, because Bram Corliss knew exactly what those words do to a man like me. They mean lawyers. They mean money. They mean a fight in a system that rich men are comfortable in and working men are terrified of. He was betting, and it was a good bet, that I would look at that tall, expensive fence and hear the word surveyed, and think about the cost of a lawyer and about looking petty and about how tired I was and that I would do what I'd done every single time before. Nothing. And I almost did. I want to be honest about that because the temptation to just eat it was enormous. I stood in my own yard looking at his fence and I thought, it's a strip of grass. Is it worth my life savings and 2 years of my peace to fight a man who has more lawyers than I have dollars? Maybe I should just let it go. Maybe he's even right, maybe I never really understood the line. Maybe the deed does say something I don't know. He had me so turned around that I was ready to doubt 40 years of my own life. If you have listened this far, let me ask you what I had to ask myself, standing there in the grass. When someone powerful simply acts like something of yours is theirs calmly with lawyers behind them and dares you to be the one who makes a fuss, do you fight knowing it might cost you everything and make you look small and bitter? Or do you swallow it and keep your peace and let them have the strip of ground because after all it's only a strip of ground? Tell me in the comments what you'd have done because I nearly walked away, and the only reason I didn't was that as I turned to go, I looked at my father's trees, still standing exactly where he'd put them 40 years ago, on the other side of Corliss's brand new fence now, stranded on the wrong side, and something in me said, those trees know where the line is. Even if I've forgotten. Even if the deed is confusing. Those trees have been telling the truth for 40 years and they never moved an inch. So I didn't hire a lawyer first. I couldn't afford to, and anyway I had a different idea. I went into my father's things. My dad kept everything. He was that kind of man, a man of receipts and records and a filing cabinet in the workshop that I had barely touched since he died. And I went out there and I started going through it, and I want to tell you what I was looking for because it turned out to be the whole case. I was looking for proof of the trees. Because here is the thing that Bram Corliss, with all his money and his survey and his confidence, had never once considered. He thought the fight would be deed against deed, survey against survey, lawyer against lawyer, a contest of documents and money, a game he knew he'd win. He never imagined that the land itself might have kept its own records, and my father, bless him, had kept them for me without either of us knowing. In that filing cabinet I found the original survey from when my dad bought the place, decades old, with the true boundary marked, and it was not where Corliss's fence stood. It was right along the tree line, exactly where I'd always known it to be. But a survey is just a document, and Corliss had documents too, and I knew a piece of paper alone might just become another thing for lawyers to argue about. So I kept digging, and I found the thing that could not be argued with. Photographs. My father, being my father, had photographed the property over the years, and he had dated them on the back in his own hand, and there were photos going back 40 years of that row of trees, freshly planted saplings in the oldest ones, and in photo after photo, year after year, you could see the trees, and you could see that they had always marked the edge of our land, and you could see the Haddad's place beyond them where it had always been. 40 years of dated, photographed truth, showing a line that had never moved, could not move, because it was made of living trees that a man had planted with his own hands and that had grown for 4 decades exactly where he put them. And then I found the best thing of all, and it was so simple that I laughed out loud alone in that workshop. Along with the old survey were the survey markers' locations, and I went out with a shovel, and at the base of the oldest tree where the original surveyor had set it decades ago, undisturbed, buried under 40 years of leaf litter and grass, was the original boundary marker. The real one, the old iron pin, right where the survey said it would be, right at the tree line, feet and feet away from where Bram Corliss had confidently built his fence and declared the line had always been. He had a recent survey, he said, and maybe he did. But a recent survey is only as good as where the surveyor is told to start, and I have wondered ever since exactly what Corliss's surveyor was shown and told, though I've never been able to prove anything about that, and I won't accuse him of what I can't prove. It didn't matter, because I now had the original marker, in the original spot, corroborated by a 40-year-old survey and 4 decades of dated photographs and a row of living trees that no one could pick up and move. The land had kept its own records, and its records went back to before Bram Corliss had money, before he had a lawyer, before he was ever confident about anything. Let me tell you how it ended, because it did not end in a courtroom, and that's the part I'm proudest of. I did, finally, spend a little money on one letter from one lawyer, and I had that lawyer send Corliss a very calm letter that did not threaten and did not bluster. Simply enclosed copies. The old survey, a selection of the dated photographs, and a photograph of the original iron boundary marker, freshly uncovered, sitting at the base of a 40-year-old tree, feet inside his new fence. And the letter said, in effect, that my client is aware of the true boundary, has documented it thoroughly, and expects the fence to be relocated to it, and that we were confident no court would need to be troubled with a matter this clearly established. And here is the thing about a certain kind of powerful man. He is only brave when he thinks you're weak. Bram Corliss had built his whole strategy on the bet that I would fold, that I had nothing but a feeling and 40 years of assuming, and the instant he saw that iron pin in that photograph, the instant he understood that the land itself had testified against him and that I could prove every inch of it, all the confidence evaporated, because it had never been confidence, it had been a bluff resting on my silence. His lawyer called my lawyer. There was, suddenly, a great deal of talk about an honest misunderstanding, about how of course Mr. Corliss would never wish to encroach, about how the survey he'd relied upon must have contained an error. The fence came down. It was rebuilt at the tree line, at my father's line, at the true line, at Corliss's expense, and he never said one word to me about it directly ever again, because men like that cannot apologize. They can only quietly retreat and pretend it was all a mix-up. My name is Earl Vance, and here is the one thing I need you to carry out of this. When someone takes from you slowly, an inch at a time, so reasonably that fighting back would make you feel crazy, Understand that the slowness is not an accident, it is the whole method, and your embarrassment is their most valuable tool. They are counting on your decency, on your horror of being petty, on your willingness to let small things go, and they will use that willingness to move the line a foot at a time until one day they cash it all in at once. Do not be ashamed to defend the small thing. The small thing is where they start precisely because you'll be ashamed to defend it. And keep your records and honor the ones the people before you kept, because my father never knew he was building my defense when he planted those trees and dated those photographs. He was just being a practical man who marked his line and kept his receipts, and 40 years later that ordinary carefulness beat a rich man and his lawyers without our ever seeing the inside of a courtroom. So let me leave you with the question I still think about. Bram Corliss never once told a lie I could point to. He never said, "That's my land." He just acted like it, patiently, for years, and let my own silence make it true. So tell me honestly in the comments. Is a man who steals your ground an inch at a time, without ever telling a single lie out loud, better or worse than a man who just comes and takes it? Because I've decided he's worse, far worse, because the honest thief only takes your land, but the patient one very nearly took my belief in what I'd known my whole life, and the trees, my father's trees, were the only thing stubborn enough to hold the truth still until I could find it again.